"Why don't you get a real job, old man?" someone shouted as they walked past him on the sidewalk. A few people nearby laughed. Others just looked away or stepped around like he wasn't even there. The man sitting there didn't respond. He just stayed still, holding a cardboard sign. On the corner of that sign, a worn-out photo of 3 soldiers was taped. Smiling, arms around each other, frozen in a moment untouched by time. From the passing crowd, one person did something different. He didn't toss spare change. He didn't look through him like glass. He stopped. He stood tall. Then, in the middle of the noisy street, he lifted his hand in a firm salute. If you believe no veteran should be forgotten, comment, respect, for the ones who gave everything and asked for nothing. His name was James Jim Hanley, age 77, and he hadn't asked anyone for a favor in decades. Every morning he planted himself at the same corner, 5th and Durston, holding a sign that read, "Served in Vietnam, still proud, just cold and hungry." His jacket was decades old. The faded army patch on the shoulder barely hung on, a faint echo of its original color. That patch once caught sunlight in jungles halfway across the world. Now, it just blended into the fabric of the forgotten. Most days people streamed past like he was invisible. But that morning hit different. A pack of teens strolled by. One tossed a crumpled soda cup at him. Another sneered, "Maybe you'd have a home if you did something useful." The rest burst out laughing. Jim didn't even blink. He glanced down at the photo on his sign. 3 soldiers, tight smiles, youthful faces. He ran a thumb along the edge, already frayed from years of being touched, like it was his last connection to something that once made sense. No one around him spoke up. They avoided his eyes. Some picked up their pace like compassion might slow them down. One man crossed the street just to avoid walking by. A mother whispered something to her daughter while gently pulling her away, casting a look as if homelessness was some kind of infection. But Jim stayed quiet. He had learned over time that some battles weren't worth reigniting. Sometimes staying alive meant becoming part of the background. The wind picked up. The sidewalk chilled under the overcast. Guy. People hurried, coffee cups steaming in their gloved hands. Everyone seemed to be heading somewhere important. Jim shifted, trying to stretch his stiff fingers. Hands that once dragged a friend out of a smoking tank now struggled just to keep the wind from knocking his sign over. His stomach growled again. It had been nearly a full day since his last bite, nearly half a sandwich from a kind stranger at a local deli. "Spare change?" he asked softly as a woman passed. She didn't stop. "You should get help," she muttered under her breath. If only she knew how many times he had tried. Applications, phone calls, meetings, rejections, more forms, always more forms, always. Pending review. Still, he straightened up a little. The instinct never left him, even on the sidewalk. On cold concrete, he sat like a soldier, back upright, feet steady. That's who he'd been, and who, deep down, he still was. He watched the people pass by. So many faces, so many stories he'd never know. None paused long enough to see his. By noon, the sidewalk buzzed with the chaos of lunch hour. Suit jackets and messenger bags, fast walkers with places to be. Jim's cup sat by his feet with less than $1 inside. He didn't count it, didn't want to. A woman snapped a photo of him with her phone and whispered to her friend, "That's what happens when you waste your life." He didn't react. He just wiped his face, adjusted his cardboard sign, and stared forward. Somewhere between the rush of tourists and the shuffle of office workers, he sat like a rock in a stream, still, grounded, ignored. Some coins landed near his cup and rolled out of reach. He didn't move for them. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us keep making stories like this. A group of college students passed, voices loud, laughter louder. One of them, glancing at the photo on his sign, blurted out, "Hey, weren't you guys the baby killers back in the day?" His friends chuckled. Jim finally looked up. "We were. Just kids, same as you," he said. They didn't respond, just kept walking. A patrol car rolled past slowly. The officer inside met Jim's eyes for a split second, then kept driving. No crime, no scene. Just another guy society had decided not to see. Jim thought of his old friend Ray, one of the men in that photo. Died last winter at a VA facility, still waiting for treatment that came too late. The other friend, Danny, never made it past the 80s. Took his own life, left behind silence and questions no one could answer. Jim often asked himself why he was the one left. What twist of fate put him on this corner while the others were buried with folded flags? Two suited men passed, talking politics. "These homeless vets just want sympathy," one muttered. "They should be taken care of by the military." The other shrugged. Jim had heard it all before. The ignorance, the assumptions. The disconnect between who he once was and how they saw him now. His hip throbbed from sitting too long. Doctors had told him years ago he needed surgery. The appointment never came. He followed up, then again. Eventually, he gave up. Then something changed. The flow of people slowed. Conversations paused. The buzz of traffic and chatter dipped to a murmur. Heads turned. A man in military dress stepped off the curb. He wasn't a cop. This was full dress. Uniform, medals shining, stride steady. He walked toward Jim with purpose, face stern, posture flawless. A few bystanders froze. One child pointed. A hush spread thick like fog. The man came to a stop, raised his hand, and saluted. Jim's hand twitched, almost forgotten muscle memory kicking in. Slowly, shakily, he returned the salute. The motion was raw but full of something real. The silence was complete, like the world held its breath. "You Sergeant Hanley?" the man asked, voice loud enough for the whole block to hear. Jim blinked. "Haven't heard that in 30 years, he said. The man nodded. "You might not remember me, but I never forgot you." Jim looked harder. There, beneath the lines in rank, he saw it. "Captain Myers?" The man smiled. "General now, but always proud to have served under your command." People stood still, frozen mid-step, their attention pulled entirely toward the uniformed man and the veteran on the ground. A nearby food vendor reached over and turned off his music. The silence felt almost sacred now. You could hear the city, but it was like it had stepped back to give this moment space. "This man," the general continued, turning toward the slowly gathering crowd, "saved my life. Twice. Once during the war, and once after, when I was too lost to know what to do next." He pointed to the photo on Jim's sign. "See that? He pulled two of us out of a burning APC during an ambush in '69. His own arm was torn up. Didn't even hesitate. Tied it off and kept going." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "I walk around because he didn't stop walking, even when his legs were shaking." The people on the corner shifted. The laughter from earlier, gone, replaced by awe. The same people who'd stepped around Jim now leaned in, like they finally saw the truth in front of them. A woman who had taken a picture earlier wiped at her eyes. A teen from the mocking group clutched his backpack tightly and lowered his gaze. Then, the general reached into his jacket and took out a coin. Not just any coin. A challenge coin, gold-edged, embossed with the seal of the Joint Chiefs. He placed it gently in Jim's weathered palm. "You never should have ended up here," the general said, voice steady. "You deserve better than this street." Jim stared down at the coin. It felt real in a way nothing had in a long time, heavy, solid, like someone had just handed him back his name. "I tried," Jim murmured, the words dry in his throat. "I kept trying. They just kept sending me, in circles." The general nodded solemnly. "I know, the system dropped the ball, Jim, but I won't." He pulled out his phone. "I already made the call. A van is en route. A room's waiting for you at Bethesda VA. And not some cot in a hallway, you'll get a private room. Medical attention. Everything you were owed decades ago." "I didn't ask for this," Jim said quietly. "And that's exactly why you deserve it." At that, a woman from the crowd stepped forward. She was the same one who had pulled her child away earlier. Her voice was soft now. I pass this corner every day, and I never stopped to see." "None of us did," the general said, not accusing, just stating the truth. A black SUV rolled up to the curb. The driver stepped out, followed by two young Marines. Their uniforms were pristine, movements crisp. One stepped forward and addressed Jim directly. "Sir, we're here to escort you." Jim looked around, not just at the soldiers, but at the people who had watched this moment unfold. Some were crying, some were recording, some were just standing still, realizing they'd walked past hundreds of Jims without noticing. He glanced down at the few belongings beside him. A battered backpack, a frayed sleeping bag, and that photo. That was everything he had. "You don't need to bring anything," the general said softly, as if reading his mind. "We'll replace it all." But Jim still reached for the photo. That part couldn't be replaced. With effort, he stood. His knees cracked, his back winced. Time and concrete had been cruel. One of the Marines instinctively reached out, but Jim waved him off. "I got it," he said, with a flicker of the old grit. The applause began slowly, just a few claps, first. But then it swelled, not the empty kind you hear at public speeches. This was something else. This was people clapping for a man they'd ignored, and now finally understood. A teenager stepped forward, the one who had mocked Jim earlier. His eyes were red. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "I didn't know." Jim nodded, not unkindly. "Then make sure you know the next time." As the Marines helped him toward the vehicle, a businessman who had walked by earlier jogged over. "Wait," he called. He handed the general a card. "I run a veteran workforce program. When he's ready, we'll find him something." "Something. The general nodded. "We'll call you, personally." Then another woman stepped up with a care package. A man shrugged off his expensive jacket and held it out. "He needs this more than I do." The food vendor returned with a hot sandwich and a fresh cup of coffee. No charge, no words. Before getting into the SUV, Jim turned back to face them. For just a second, he stood tall. Not just upright, but proud, dignified. A soldier, not a statistic. His fingers brushed the fraying edge of the army patch on his jacket. Someone in the crowd said, "Thank you for your service," Jim half smiled. "I was just doing my job." Then he stepped into the vehicle. As the SUV pulled away, the general turned to the remaining crowd. "Remember that face," he said. "Look for it. In every town, on every corner, see them before it's too late." A reporter who had been filming all of it stepped forward. "General," she asked, "how did you even find him after all these years?" The general's answer was simple. "I wasn't looking for him. I just try to see the ones no one else does. Today it was him. Tomorrow it could be someone else." And just like that, the crowd began to drift. Slower this time. Quieter. Changed. A week later, a bench appeared on that same corner. A small plaque read, "In honor of those we nearly forgot." Jim never returned to that spot. He didn't need to. At Bethesda, Jim received the kind of care that should have been his long ago. Real care, not an overworked clinic or a paper-shuffling runaround. Within days, his medical records were fully restored. The hip surgery he'd needed for years was scheduled and fast-tracked. The room they gave him wasn't fancy, but it was his. Clean sheets, a door that locked, a view of the garden outside the hospital, where flowers were just beginning to bloom. The first night, Jim slept without interruptions. No concrete, no sirens, no dreams that left him gasping. Just quiet. Rest. For the first time in decades, he felt safe enough to let go. The photo that had been taped to his sign was now cleaned up, reprinted, and framed. It sat beside his hospital bed, right next to a new pair of glasses and the challenge, coin still tucked carefully in his palm. Visitors began arriving, not random strangers, but old faces from long ago. Soldiers who had served with him, now scattered across the country, drawn back by the story that was spreading. And General Myers. He came every Thursday without fail. They didn't always talk about the war. Sometimes they talked about baseball, or about how cities look different now, or about how kids these days didn't even know what a rotary phone was. It wasn't the content of the conversations that mattered. It was the presence, the recognition, the unspoken message. You're not forgotten. One afternoon, as they looked out over the garden, Jim turned to the general and asked, "Why'd you stop that day? Of all the people out there, why me?" The general didn't hesitate. "Your eyes," he said. "You were still scanning the crowd, still alert. That's the first thing I noticed. The second thing was, no one else did." And as the story of that moment spread, not sensationalized but quietly shared, something unexpected happened. Not viral clicks or internet stardom. Something better. Something human. Donations to veterans organizations surged. VA centers reported a spike in people asking how they could help. Politicians started being questioned on live TV about why it took a viral moment for one veteran to get basic care. One morning, Jim woke up to find dozens of Marines standing silently in formation outside his hospital window. No press, no speech. Just presence. Quiet, disciplined, respectful. "They've been coming all week," a nurse explained, standing at the window with him. "Different units, different times." Jim's voice cracked. "Why?" She smiled. "Because you reminded them why they signed up in the first place." He didn't know how to respond. So he didn't. He just stood there, watching, letting the weight of it settle in. At a press conference a week later, General Myers addressed the nation's growing concern over homeless veterans. His words were brief but struck deep. "We didn't rescue a veteran. We remembered a brother." And back in the city, at the corner of 5th and Durston, the transformation was unmistakable. Where Jim once sat, people now paused. Some left flowers on the bench. Others sat and simply took time to look around, really look. The energy had shifted. People were starting to notice the faces they used to ignore. The teenager who had mocked Jim that day. He and his friends launched a school project interviewing local veterans about their post-service lives. The videos became part of their community's education program. And in each interview, the veterans said the same thing in different ways. "I wasn't asking for much, just not to be invisible." Jim, now months into recovery, slowly began walking again. Therapy sessions helped him ease the pain, both physical and buried deep. He even cracked a joke one day, something about how these hospital mashed potatoes were still better than the MREs he ate in Nam. The nurses laughed, but they knew. Humor was a sign he was healing. The businessman who had offered him a job followed through. When Jim was strong enough, a position was waiting for him. Part-time, with flexible hours, doing what he loved, working with his hands in a workshop that helped refurbish old gear for active duty use. It wasn't charity. It was purpose. And Jim, for the first time in years, began to feel like he was part of something again. He kept the challenge coin with him always. Some nights when the hall was quiet and the wind rustled outside the window, he'd hold it in his hand. Not because he needed a reminder of where he had been, but because it reminded him of what he still had. His dignity, his voice, his name. "The hardest part," he once said to a group of VA workers, "wasn't being homeless, it was being unseen." Now people were seeing, not just him, but others too. And across the country, whenever someone spotted an old man on a bench with tired eyes and a weathered sign, more and more of them paused, looked closer, asked questions. Some saluted, because one man had been seen, and it reminded the world to open its eyes.